many of you, hey, you may already know that. This might be the first time you're hearing it, but...
Yep. But it's important that we say that. And yes, these, as we've said, several times, this is exactly how our conversations go. We start with fires and grief, and there's nothing you can do. And, the society is a shit show, as always.
Yep. Welcome to our couch.
Right. Welcome to our couch. That's a good one.
Frequency overload,
like
our nervous systems.
Our lives. Well, I think we were saying, or you were saying, it feels like we've lived different lives since the last time we recorded, which really was only
3 months ago.
Oh, it was 3 months ago. It's not 2 months ago.
Yeah.
I have no concept of time.
Again, lifetimes. So yeah, I guess we should just say, hey friends, welcome back to Meet Me at the Cottage podcast. Thank you for your patience while we've been on a hiatus. As Jen said, we've lived some lives since our last recording.
Yeah, as always, we go into this with, honestly, I mean, our process so far has just been a quick check-in either the night before or the day of, like, what do we want to talk about?
And we wing it. So here we are.
And we usually are on the same page with what we want to talk about, or we'll just kind of go with it, which I think keeps it organic and not like scripted and weird. I mean, not, I guess, I don't know. I just feel like
that's what we said in our first episode, is that this is really like everybody who's listening is sitting in on what a normal conversation or hangout is.
Yep.
For Jen and I, jokingly but not jokingly, we're both people that aren't great at small talk, nor do we really enjoy it, but deep, meaningful interactions and conversations we're here for. So,
and it's cool that people, have been responsive to it and feel a connection to whatever we're talking about. It's neat to, hear that.
Yeah, and we love hearing from everybody, whether it's our friends, our family, friends of friends, people that we don't know who have contacted us in whichever way they've contacted us, and we've gotten really great feedback on our podcast, which, we love to hear, because we're both still people that are like, wait, what, really?
Yeah.
Like, you're enjoying this? Yeah. Because like a lot of things Jen and I do, it's kind of for us. And if nobody ever listened, we'd be okay with that. But we're so great that everybody's here with us.
Yes, we absolutely are.
This is just fun for us. Yeah. So it's, like I said, a normal hang conversation. We just happen to have microphones in front of us and a sound guy that's telling us how far or near to the microphone that we should or shouldn't be.
And we've upgraded since the last time, which will usually we'll upload some photos just to kind of show what what the behind the scenes looks like. But we have fancy sound dampening now, which is fancy to us. Just for the record, it's fancy to us. And like microphones that move. This is very exciting.
Yeah, we're sitting in some bright pink chairs. Marcus, our sound engineer, producer, and all-around great guy, is in the other room right now. So here we are. And like we said, it's been a few months, and that was really unexpected. But as with life, it happens, and unexpected things do pop up. So, Jen, if you want to talk a little bit about the unexpected that's happened to you and Marcus and your family since we last recorded.
Yeah, so I don't remember. I feel like it was only just a few days before we were supposed to record again, honestly. It was about a week before. Our house burnt down, which is interesting to share with people who I haven't seen in a little bit, or I have to just say, hey, so like our house burned down. But anyway, it's like, let me get this out of the way. But yeah, so our neighborhood, our neighbor's house caught fire, which it burnt hot and fast. And as a result, it was a windy night. in Middletown. Like a lot of times it is windy in Middletown. And it carried the flames from my neighbor's house all the way over to our house and then all the way over to their neighbor's house. So 3 houses, including my own, were burnt as total losses. So the one in the middle burnt down to the foundation, and then the neighbors, myself and the other neighbor, the majority, if not the complete second floor, was burnt down. And then lots and lots of water damage because the firefighters came to put the water or put the fire out. So it resulted in mass water damage in our first floor. So, and then our basement as well. All of us are okay, you know, which is extremely important. Every single one of the houses, everyone got out okay, including my pets, or our pets, which, you know, was extremely important piece. Everyone's safety, including our little furry babies. So that in and of itself feels like a miracle given the circumstances of what happened. And we were, you know, awoken in the middle of the night, or it was about 4 a.m., to a very loud explosion. So the house had been burning, the other house had been burning for quite a while, and we're sleeping through it. And there just happened to be a loud explosion from that fire that woke us up. And it was literally minutes before the fire took over our house and the smoke took over our bedroom. So we had just really just gotten out in time. So something I learned, which maybe is common knowledge for other folks, is that unfortunately in house fires, when people do die, it's often from smoke inhalation and smoke asphyxiation, I think, which I didn't know. And so it's a little bizarre to have come that close to death, because I don't think it's fully it's not, my brain hasn't allowed itself to fully understand that information. Like I can logically say it, but my brain won't take that in, right? That me and my children, my partner, Marcus, and our furry babies, you know, it was a very, very, very real possibility. So that can't fully kind of enter in my brain still. And that's okay. But that is just what it is. So we had some fabulous neighbors across the street from us who took us in and let us be in safety while we waited for the firefighters to put out the fire. And then we continue to have great neighbors who continue to check on us and support us, and really great community support and connection has been, you know, truly overwhelming to see and experience, and a little hard to kind of receive, because I think that is something that I do struggle with in general, is receiving support and help. So to see this overwhelming, you know, support from strangers and people we've known forever and everyone in between, it's been such a beauty and humanity in something so tragic, you know, which has been interesting to experience something so tragic, but also see beauty in it, you know, because everyone is okay, you know, and I know that that's part of it, because I think
I'm just going to interject and say physically okay.
Yeah.
I think that's important to note, that oftentimes when we have these types of events or tragedies, you know, the first thing people ask is, are you okay? And people generally say yes, but rarely do people specify. Right. And I know that if you're a person who's been in the field of working in trauma, mental health, any type of thing like that, I think there's a heightened awareness of clarifying, are you okay physically?
Right.
And I know that you and Marcus have both been very intentional about saying we're all physically okay.
Right.
Because the other part of that is the mental and emotional part that comes along with experiencing trauma and tragedy, and, you know, coming so close to dying and losing your your family, your house, your pets. And I think that's part of the reason why your brain isn't fully allowing you to take it all in, is because the beauty of our brain, it's a wonderful organ, but it's protective of us. Yep. And once we're in a space to be able to fully process, only then will these things pop back up. So,
and it's funny going through this experience, you know, our first podcast was about grief, right? Mm-hmm. Which was organic, you know, and so much of what you shared through that echoed and continues to echo in my mind and in my experience. Is like, I remember Crystal saying that. And while I understood a lot of what you were saying, I didn't experience that kind of grief ever in my life. So it was just very interesting to have all of that be echoing and being like, I'm so grateful that I heard that was a part of that podcast, because it was actually very, very helpful through the process. And not only that, as we said, we are, you know, totally different lives right now. Since the last time we checked in, Crystal is just about to wrap up her certified grief educator training, and I can't, you know, it was just, it happened to be coincidental that you were taking this class, this education certification, at the same time that I was experiencing this, you know, fire and dealing with this, that I've been able to directly benefit from the work that you've done, and well, not only the work you're doing in the certification course, but your years and years of history in serving traumatic grief in your role as a police-based victim service specialist, where that's all you did was help people on basically the worst day of their lives. So not only do I appreciate our friendship for a million reasons, the professional support basically that I was able to receive from Crystal. So thanks for doing this for me. That was the intention. Like, I see a fire in Jenn's future. I'm going to go ahead and register for grief. No. But that it really has been such a tremendous help by hearing the podcast, but then directly experiencing the support that Crystal was able to give, or organically, naturally, saying things I needed to hear that I didn't even know I need to hear. And I'm a licensed mental health professional, right? So like, while I get a lot of things, when it's your own, it's just, you know, it's a whole different world. So what Crystal's been able to offer has been so tremendously helpful, and we're excited about this venture for Crystal, because now she's going to be offering grief education, one-on-one sessions, healing sessions, group healing sessions, and really kind of prioritizing this work, which I'd love for you to share more about.
Well, thank you, Jenn. Yeah. I do want to say that I think it's important that you did note how helpful like the grief stuff has been for you, because I think oftentimes people don't realize or forget that grief is associated with all parts of life, just not death, right?
Yes.
And it can be a loss, whether it's a death or not. It's the loss of the life that you had, of your material possessions, the feeling of safety. You can grieve a divorce, even if it's what you wanted. Mm-hmm. You can grieve the end of a job,
a friendship,
a
breakup.
So, right, a breakup. And, or, you know, not living the life that you wanted for yourself or saw yourself living. So, you know, it's important to just kind of put that reminder out there that grief isn't just about death.
And also that, you know, we as a society, you know, we always comment on society, do a, you know, yet another awful job at real grief support. And Crystal's agenda really is to change the narrative of grief, like, and how we do it out loud and proud, right? Like, not in this awkward, isolating. One of the things I said to Crystal is I feel like my grief is very isolating, and I didn't know how to, I didn't want to burden people with this sad story. I didn't want people to help me or try to fix it. And again, this echoes from episode 1 when Crystal's, you know, saying this stuff, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's the same thing. But how isolating and sad and lonely that I felt. And Crystal, knowing that already from her own personal experience, but also in her education and just dealing with other victims of grief and trauma, that this agenda to change the narrative is so exciting. Not only because I personally am experiencing it right now, of course, but in general, like anything that has to do with centering people's feelings and honoring and validating and witnessing and saying we have space for you and you're allowed to be uncomfortable, sad, unhappy, basically anything but just happy. You're allowed to be. And I'm just excited to see you have such a conviction around it. And that it's becoming like, I think, the center of your work.
Yeah, you're right. I do have this conviction of wanting to rewrite the narrative of grief in our culture. And again, all of my tidbits that I say are from my own experience. So this isn't a blanket statement type of situation. But grief is very lonely. And I think sometimes it's hard for folks to hear that, especially if they're a friend, a loved one, somebody who knows you, because they're thinking, well, I'm supporting you. I'm here.
Yeah.
And yes, that is very true. But if you're not the person who's grieving or you've not experienced, and again, I'm talking about death on my side. Jenn is gonna, she's speaking from the experience of her house fire. It is lonely because if you can't relate, it's hard, right? So it would be similar to you being an astronaut and we're in a group of people and two of you are astronauts and the third person isn't, and you're having the conversation. Only they can really know what it's like to be an astronaut, and you're kind of on the outside. Even though you're excited and you're supportive, you're not an astronaut and you don't know what it felt like to go into space and to come back from space. So again,
I think that's a really great visual, right? Like it really does feel like you're out in another world, kind of just floating along sometimes in another sphere. Or
wasn't even my intention, but great.
Look at you. You're just doing it and not even knowing it.
Yeah, so it can be lonely. And like I said, it's not that your partner, your friends, your family, your community aren't supportive. They are. It's just, it's different.
Navigating it.
It's different navigating it. But if you know people who are also in grief, right? Or have experienced loss at some point in their life, it's a little bit easier because you have this sense of not having to explain how it feels. They just know how it feels.
Well, and I remember explaining how I was feeling, and I was afraid to say it even. And you were like, and just hearing that's exactly that. Well, that's how I felt. That's how, this is what my education tells me. To be like, okay, yeah, right. Okay. So I'm not like weird and it's so helpful to just the camaraderie. I don't know if that's quite the right word, but the connection around it of feeling not weird. And
feeling seen and having your experience and your feelings validated and witnessed, because as we all know, in life in general, we just want to be seen, heard, loved, validated, understood, all of that stuff. So really, when it comes to grief, it's pretty simple. It can't be fixed.
Yeah.
Nobody wants you to solve a problem because it's not a problem that needs to be solved or fixed.
Yep.
We just want our feelings and our experience to be witnessed and validated. Yeah. And that means just listening. And that's really hard, to just be a bystander and listen, actively listen, without piping in like, oh, well, when my house burnt down or when my person died, there's a time and a place for that. And I am also guilty of wanting to say, oh, right, when my mom died, right? Because it's building this connection.
And there's sometimes that's really helpful, right? To be like, oh, I did experience that too. But it's sort of like balanced, I guess, right? Of like, oh, when my mom died, this is what I was feeling. Oh, okay, I was feeling that too. And it's just like an exchange,
right? Versus
a recentering, I think.
Yeah, and I think you and I've had this conversation before about this, is that, oftentimes, I know you said you've had the experience of people, when you start telling your story, they interrupt and put their own story out there, and then you just shut down and okay, well, I guess this isn't the place for me.
Right.
And that's also happened to me as well. But I've also been the other person. And I know we said this in a conversation previously that we had, is that really at the end of the day, we all want our feelings and our experience to be validated and witnessed. So the person who's supposed to be actively listening, who may have had a similar experience, is also feeling that. So for them, this is an opportunity to, oh, okay, you're opening that door. Let me go through it because of whatever reason. So
I think it's a real commentary on there's no space for it. There's no space to talk about this. Oh, you're talking about, now I can talk about mine, because I can't just be at like a work networking thing and be like, this one time I had a house fire. There's not literally dedicated space for it. So it's like we're all kind of vying for that time. So it's like, oh, you went through this? Well, let me tell you about my time when I went through this. And we can maybe connect on it, or just be in a shared experience. But then the other person who's maybe not there yet, or we're all vying for wanting to be seen and heard with no dedicated space. And yes, there's counseling, right? I that is an important piece. However, group witnessing, right? Village witnessing or community, just together and being in solidarity and community. As I preach anyway about motherhood in general, we crave that connection and that solidarity and community. That's why your grief group healing is going to be so successful, and folks have already signed up for, is because we want that. But we're so desperate for it, and it doesn't exist anywhere, which is, you're deliberately, loudly, and proudly creating space for it, and not just this like little side thing we're doing over here. But no, it should be centered and supported, and you can come here and do that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And talk therapy is great. I have my own therapist.
I also do. Yeah.
And I say that not with any shame attached to it, because again, this is Mental Health Awareness Month. And it's important to speak about these things that we might struggle with behind closed doors. But, luckily, I had already been connected to a therapist prior to my mom dying.
Right.
Which was very, very helpful to me after she died, because I already had that tool in my toolbox, if you will. And, my mom died in 2021. It's post-pandemic, still kind of pandemic times. Actually, when my mom died, we were having a resurgence of COVID. And Jen, you know this, and I know this because I did intake coordination for your therapy practice. There is a shortage of therapists because they have their own burnout and are overwhelmed. So there isn't a lot of availability. And if there is, it's, several months down the road. So fortunately for me, I was already connected to somebody who was able to walk with me on this journey, having already known my history, which, I essentially started therapy to help me work through anxiety.
Right. That's our experience as therapists, is folks walk in the door like, yeah, I'm just having a hard time at work right now, or I'm stressed out, I can't really sleep. And then we get to dig around and do the work. But this story is exactly why I advocate for, having a therapist. I like to joke of like on retainer, right? Like it's another tool in the toolbox. Like it should be part of your wellness or well-being, to have an established relationship with a therapist, so that yes, when life throws you curveballs or grief, loss, unexpected, like
your house burns down,
right, that whole thing, you can tap in and be like, hey, guess what, girl?
That's exactly what happened after I had my appointment after my mom died. Had my appointment with my therapist, and she's like, so how have things been? Yeah, so my mom died.
Yeah. Guess what, girl? Like craziness going. But as you've already said, right? Like having that established relationship and history with that person, it allowed for just a piece to not have to be done, a hurdle that didn't have to be
the whatever. Explanation of everything, right? Of my life, my relationship with my mom, like the anxiety that I already deal with, which, you know, I've been an anxious person probably most of my life. Mm-hmm. It got exacerbated with the job that I used to do.
And the vicarious trauma.
And, you know, having an on-call rotation. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, obviously I don't do that job anymore, but it really did impact my well-being. And I don't say that to say anything bad about my job, but working in trauma or being exposed to trauma and violence on a regular basis is not what everybody does.
And not what we weren't built for that.
Right.
We were very appreciative of frontliners like yourself and other frontline, you know, workers. No one is built for that, no matter how, whatever fill in the blank you want to use, how, you know, badass you are, or, you know, like
unaffected, which, you know, is how I felt.
Yeah.
Unaffected by my job. No, I'm cool. I'm fine.
Right.
And
no one is built for it.
No. And surprisingly enough, Jenn was the one who made me aware of like, hey, do you know you have vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue and you're burnt out? No, I didn't, because that was my norm. It was my baseline to feel that way. And I'm not alone. My coworkers, yes, other people that I know that do things similarly, we can all relate. It's that, oh, me too, right?
Yeah. So then there's nothing weird about it.
This high anxiety, the being worried all the time, hypervigilance. If you do the things that we did, you know, saw the things that we did, that was how you lived your life. And anybody on the outside thought that you were kind of a little wacky or too paranoid, or you need to just let it go.
Because you saw the real ramifications.
Right. And I'm like, great. I'm glad you live in a world where you're not worried about insert anything, right? Because at the time, daily, I saw the worst in people.
Yeah.
So my expectation wasn't really high for humanity. And I say that jokingly, but not really.
Well, it's because if it's all you see, right, it starts to be like the norm, right? Like and even if you know, yes, I know logically out there, not everyone is causing harm to people on a daily basis. It is all you see. So your brain's like, yeah, that is reality. And it is.
It is.
It is reality. It's just that it was like your job to be exposed to it. I remember when I worked in domestic violence, when I was hitting vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout in that particular field, I started to think that like everyone was a domestic violence offender. And that, you know, I remember thinking, oh yeah, well, what are they really like behind closed doors? You know, like, and yes, domestic violence is actually quite pervasive. And the stats are like 1 in 5, 1 in 4. This is self-reported. So how much it's
how not often just physical either. But.
Right. I mean, you know, quite often it's emotional, you know, psychological,
financial,
right. All those things. But, you know, not to detract that the point just being is like, I just started to believe, like, cause that was what I was being exposed to. It was the stories I was hearing. So it was just this sort of, yes, that is what it is. And that is an indicator of burnout. That is an indicator of compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma. But when you're in it, you don't know it. It just becomes like all consuming, and you do get edgier. You're having your PTSD responses. And until onlookers can say, hey, listen, you know, or you're sitting, for me, I was sitting in a training and I was like, oh, that's me. I have that, right now. Then, you know, like like, you know, once again, we need each other to help us kind of view these things and see these things.
Right. Because it's easier to see things from the outside, which kind of goes back to your statement about the beauty of humanity in the aftermath of the tragedy that you and your family experienced. It speaks to what you said about the beauty of humanity, is that the world is a dumpster fire. People aren't great. That's true.
It is true.
Right? But also, it's an and but.
Right.
Or yes, but situation of people really are good. Like,
yeah, I think they want to be, but they're so
and again, blanket statement, everybody's terrible because of the exposure that we've had to the things that we've seen, or personal lives, professional lives, watching the news, whatever. But people, there are more good than bad.
And I think people want to actually be that, because you see in this tragic moment, the default for many folks is to rush in.
Yes.
And support and help and offer love, kind words. One guy called me because the day of the fire, because our dog ran out of the house when we did, which is how I knew she was going to be okay. Which I joked that I'm like, weren't you supposed to be barking and waking us up, Rosie? Like, come on, man. But she ran out with us. So, but some guy in my neighborhood called me to let me know he saw her on his Ring camera. I mean, why, right? What, like, why? He just wanted me to know she was okay. Like, this is the default of when you don't get to think, you just act. Right. The act is, oh my gosh, and we rush it. Not everybody, right? But it is a lot of people. That is a default. But we're so disconnected, right? We're so in our little holes, in our little houses or our apartments or our homes or wherever we are, minding our business and not being a burden and being hyper independent, when really something where there is no time to think. And I actually related this. See, now it's not me getting choked up, it's just the allergies. I related the trauma after this happening to when I had my my first child. It reminded me of that experience where it was just a shock to the system. You're just surviving, and Marcus was there with me through my child, our first child, and the trauma of that and recovering from that. It felt exactly the same. I was like, this is like when we had Lissy. Like, it felt exactly like that. And he was there with us again, it really is, if folks want to help and lean in, they don't want to think, they don't have time to think, they just rush in. And it shouldn't take a tragedy to see that, right? But it often does, because it is this opportunity not to think. And that's where our humanity is. That's where it wants to be. We don't want to, nothing mattered in that moment, right? Not what political party you affiliated with, what hierarchy, what socioeconomic status you are. None of that mattered. It was just, oh my gosh. Yeah, it was just human
trying
beings.
To help
right.
humans.
And to see that is really, in my belief, our default setting,
Oh yeah. I absolutely agree with you that that's our default setting, but experience, life, all of the things kind of cloud our view, right? Our experiences. There's a lot of truth to, children being pure because they haven't been tainted or jaded by life yet.
Yeah.
And that's not true for all children. I do understand that. But for the most part, children don't sit and calculate, how is this going to benefit me, right? They just do.
They just live. Yeah, they act.
They act.
They're very behavioral.
Right. So people want to be helpful. And I think, again, it comes back to the grief and wanting to fix it, right? That's our default. We want to fix everything. We want to solve a problem. And in this instance, that's what people want, to be helpful.
Yes.
How can I be helpful? And, I was that way with you with your fire. So I was actually in Italy with my partner when this happened. We went for a week, and
also just P.S. such an exciting time. I mean, it was so cool. Like, Crystal's going out of the country and she's taking this big leap, and it was like not planned like 6 years in advance, like Crystal prefers, right? Just like this really cool kind of leap in and just going and doing this amazing trip with her partner. And it was like, I was getting updates. I'm like, this is so cool, and pictures. It was amazing.
Yeah, the single greatest, one of the greatest experiences of my life. But, I was coming home on March 11th, which was the day that Jenn's house caught on fire. Yeah. So in Italy, we were 6 hours ahead, I think.
Yes, yeah.
So we had gotten to the airport super early because Jane's flight left earlier than mine. She was going off on another adventure in another country, and I was coming home, and I had texted Jenn to tell her, like, hey, I'm at the airport. I'm here early. Whatever. Only to have had Jane leave to board her flight, which was hard enough in and of itself, to be waiting to board my own flight. And I get a text from Jenn saying my house is on fire, which I've told her this. For a moment, I thought she was kidding.
Right, because
not an actual literal fire, but like something had occurred where it's like chaos or drama or
which is something I would legitimately say.
Right,
it's a shit show. Like life's on fire right now, which is why I included a photo because I was like,
yes,
I think
so,
yes.
So I get, and again, not remembering like what time is it there when I'm getting this. It's 10:30 or something. And having a breakdown in the airport over this and wanting to know how to help. Like, I'm on the other side of the world. Yeah. Not the other side, but in a different country, in a different time zone, unable to be helpful.
About to board a long flight with no internet or cell access.
Internet, and that in and of itself was its own problem for being delayed and whatever. But that's a different story. But it just added to the stress and the anxiety of my day. But I felt so helpless that I was in another country about to board a flight. Jenn's experiencing this, event. Her whole family, it was touch and go with the animals. Couldn't find them, found them.
Yeah, we rescued the animals. Firefighters brought us one cat. I'm not going to tell you how many cats we have because I don't even want to hear it. But
that's okay. We can name and claim who we are. We love animals.
That's right.
It doesn't matter if you have 12 cats or one.
I know. But there's stigma about cats, and I really don't appreciate it.
But we're here to
destigmatize.
We're doing all the things, right? You gotta buck against the system and reframe it.
Right, but we couldn't go back in. So the firefighters actually brought us one cat, which was our stray cat, which is why we have so many cats, because we found a stray kitten and we could not possibly let that kitten go.
A lover.
And that guy, the firefighters brought us, I'm like, of course he's rolling solo. That's our guy who rolls solo. But so we got him right away, sort of right away, but as we had to wait for the firefighters, and I guess I thought, like in the movies, like the firefighters would go in and get the animal. No, that's not what happened. So after they left, we had to go back. Like Marcus and I and his sister went back in to our house, not sure what we were going to find, but we had to try. And all of those little guys, there were 3 more. That's correct, everyone. Also, I just want to say, 2 of those cats were brother and sister that my friend who gave us the kittens was like, you have to take 2. We're like, oh, okay. So that's why we have so many. But they were there huddled in the basement and learned how to, or figured out how to survive. Once again, I'm like, you couldn't tell somebody?
Animal instincts, right?
Yeah.
But, this helplessness that I felt because my go-to is how can I help, right? And that's not a surprise to me. I've built a career on being a helper and solving problems. And it's also not a bad
thing to want to help, right? Like, and how can I help you? What do you need? I think that's not,
It's not a bad thing, but it really... I felt helpless because I couldn't do anything, which if I was here, what would I have really done? What would you do? Right? But it's this feeling of not being here, which the irony, I guess, in all of this also is that since my mom has died and if I've taken trips, Jenn is my go-to person that gets every tidbit of information of like, here's my flights, here's the address where I'm staying, here's the name of the person, here are my bank account numbers, here's who has keys to my house. Because
and then I go shopping. No.
And part of that is because of my history of what I did for work and having to locate next of kin for death investigations where I had to do death notifications and how hard it is. It's not easy. It's not the movies. It's not TV where somebody's just magically there. And so ever since I did that job, I've tried to make it as easy as possible. If something were to happen to me, this is how you're going to find me, who to contact. So not unsurprising for the trip to Italy, it was the same thing. It's like, here's all the information. And Jen's like, well, hopefully I'm not going to need it. And she didn't.
Yeah.
But she's the person that had this tragedy happen while I was away. And, so this not learned helplessness really, but feeling helpless. And
you're literally the opposite of learned helplessness. You're go in and like, no, I will not deal with this scenario. If this is the scenario, I'm not just going to accept it, or I'm going to put myself in scenarios that challenge me. So definitely not a learned helplessness, but a feeling of helplessness.
A feeling of helplessness, of not knowing how to help, wanting to fix, but also you've talked about your grief associated with this. And I had my own experience through this of putting myself in your position and how I felt. And it was interesting for me because my other than feeling helpless and wanting to fix it, the other feelings I was having was, I don't want to ask you about it. I don't want to like bring it up.
Right. The things we're ingrained with that we don't even realize.
Right. But I also know you well enough to know that like maybe it wasn't the time, the day that I got back the night of your fire to ask for all of the details, right? Like what happened? You don't have the bandwidth for that. You just don't. It's trauma, right?
Yeah.
But also not wanting to like create a scenario where it might be uncomfortable or activating. And then it made me feel what I would assume other people would feel with me and my mom dying and not wanting to talk about it or ask questions or, for fear of making me upset. And I think there's some similarities there and maybe not some similarities. And I think that initially when my mom died, I probably wouldn't have been. And I wasn't. I know I wasn't. I didn't want to tell the story 12 million times because I had to tell the story 12 million times to all of the people that I had to call to close accounts, to notify of her death, to make aware, to send the death certificates. And it's this constant re-traumatization of having to relive it. And then if you're lucky enough, they ask, oh, well, what happened? So then there's that.
Yeah. Yes. Which is a common response, right? Like this happened. Oh my gosh, what happened? I think a lot of people, it's almost just like a default.
I think it's also like a normalization, which we were talking about this maybe before we started recording of people driving by your house in the neighborhood and wanting to see it.
After like everyone found out about it, right? It was like 3 houses caught on fire and burned down. And then people from like are all over. I don't know, we didn't stop and ask everybody, but they were just coming through to see it.
So it's this feeling of disbelief, but also I think there's this part of how to not let it happen to you, right?
Right.
So
like what happened in this scenario?
Oh wait,
so
right?
I can make sure
so
it doesn't,
I don't do that, right? Oh,
or,
your mom died from. Okay, well,
I'll get her checked up. My mom checked out right now,
right? Yeah. And my mom didn't die from anything I thought she was going to die from.
Yeah.
She had kidney cancer. She had her kidney removed 3 months before she died. She did not die from that. She did great with that. She fell, hit her head, and suffered a massive brain bleed that left her unresponsive. So, in all the carefulness, right, of the worry and all of the things, this is what happened.
Well, it's a false sense of security that we're all looking for, and it's not to poke holes in it, but it truly is.
No, that's a great way of saying it. It's a false sense of security of going through like all of the things, your checklist of. Make sure I do this. Make sure I don't do that.
Right. What also, why a lot of women are the consumers of true crime stuff, right? Because we're not listening to like figure out how to do crime. We're listening to figure out how to not get crimed.
Right. Because the criminals, the rapists, all of them, nobody in society is actually saying, hey, how about you don't rape?
Right.
Hey, how about you don't murder, stalk, do all of the things?
Yep. It's just be in a relationship. Yeah. How about you don't be in a relationship?
The burden is on the
victim.
other person, whether it's, a victim of XYZ, whether it's racism.
Yep.
And
what did you do to provoke it?
Right.
Because we are a victim blaming society across the board, not just in gender-based crimes or things that happen predominantly to women or any marginalized groups. Across the board, it's just, well, what did you do to deserve it? Because I think we're also, not meaning to sound like jerks, but wanting to be like, what did you do that caused it? Because then I can understand it was something you did, and then I just won't do that, right? Or like we were sort of saying, like, well, I mean, obviously he got mugged walking down that street, like, duh. When really people who decide, especially in, crimes against generally speaking women, or like domestic violence, sexual assault, like it's not, no matter, how much you really try to arm up and make sure like you don't get got, if a person decides they want to get you, that's usually it. That they just do, right? It's not because you didn't do a good job covering your drink or making sure you didn't pick the partner that's this or that, or
you locked your door, you did all of these things.
Because they just want to make it seem like it's something you could have avoided, as opposed to really a systemic societal problem.
Exactly. So, the women have to do the self-defense to learn how to defend themselves against an asshole that shouldn't be
raping.
P.S.
Most sexual assaults are someone you know.
Exactly.
So the sexual assault, the sexual defense, what are they called? Rape defense courses.
For the stranger lurking in the bushes.
That is almost never happening. Almost never happening. What would be much more effective is how to defend yourself against people you know who are going to rape you, which is still not your problem. It's theirs. However, like, it's a little comical because it's this like idea that that's who really gets you, and why women have trouble, or people who are sexually assaulted have trouble identifying it as sexual assault, because it wasn't the stranger in the bushes. It's
be
often
your
not.
partner.
It's almost never.
It could be your husband, or it could be
your best friend's cousin. It could be the dad at the sleepover. I mean, a lot of things, right? And it's almost always someone you know. Not to go down this rabbit hole, but it just burns me up to hear about the rape defense courses. I'm like, really? That's hilarious.
Well, and in speaking about that, several years ago, I was at the gym on the treadmill, and they had the TVs on, and it was like a news story about a woman who had been sexually assaulted in her apartment. And the newscasters were saying all of these things like that you could do, like make sure your doors. And I was like, she fucking was in her house.
Yeah.
So what else can you do to prevent a predator from violating not only your body, but your sense of security and safety by coming into your home?
Right. Like Breonna Taylor was murdered by police while she slept, being in her house, right? And there's a lot of stories like, so again, it's just like, you can tell us what to do all day, but it
really should be to the predators, hey, how about you just don't rape? How about you just don't do these things, rather than putting it on the other person?
But because who are the majority of perpetrators, right? The people in power in our society, or at least hierarchically tend to have more power. Not always, blah blah blah, but we live in a patriarchal, white supremacist capitalist society. So when those things are prioritized over human lives and well-being, and then we see the effects of that with crime based on those kinds of things, or hurt and harm based on those kind of things, in order to hold those people accountable, we have to dismantle our entire society, which I'm down for. Anarchy all day.
But, then the people in power wouldn't have power. But also, many people already know this, but just as a reminder, rape isn't about sex. It's about power and control. So you'll hear people who might say, he could get any woman that he wanted.
Right.
He wouldn't have done that. Or she's ugly. Or she's old or what have you. So it has nothing to do with attraction. It has nothing to do with the actual sex. It has everything to do with power and control and dominance. And dominance. So many of you, hey, you may already know that. This might be the first time you're hearing it, but
but it's important that we say that. And yes, these, as we've said, several times, this is exactly how our conversations go. We start with fires and grief, and we end up in rape is not your fault, and there's nothing you can do, and the society is a shit show as always.
Yep. Welcome to our couch.
Right. Welcome to our couch. That's a good one. That's a good one.
I used to want to have a book called Tales from the Couch.
I love that.
Yeah.
We're writing a book. It's called Tales from the Couch.
Yeah, that was already in our plan. We've talked about that. Yep. Mostly because my outline or frame of reference for that are Karen and Georgia from My Favorite Murder, who started their podcast, 7 years ago. Now they own a podcast network. They're huge. They're number one on the podcast charts.
Sick.
And they have a book. So naturally, that's going to be what Jen and I do at some point.
Naturally.
Have a book.
Obviously.
Yeah. So you're here on the ground floor, folks.
Yeah. Right. You're welcome, I guess. Just kidding.
Yeah. So it's interesting how our conversations just really... Actually, when I'm thinking about it, I know I recently posted something in my Instagram stories, which was reposted from somebody, and we've probably all seen something like this before, where it can be true for healing, it's true for grief, and that's what I'm thinking about right now, is that healing or grief, I've seen this graphic where it's like what people think grief is, right? And it's this really linear stages, right? What it actually is if you took a pencil and you just made a whole bunch of squiggly lines on a sheet of paper, that's healing, that's grief. It's not linear, and neither is this conversation. So
right, and it never is. And we're like, did we put periods on some of the points that we were making? And I'm like, yeah, maybe we didn't. But I think a lot of us can relate to that too, of just having a conversation, go this way and that way. But it's still, at least in our heads, it's followable.
It's followable, but again, as I'm sitting here thinking about this, it is very indicative of trauma.
Yeah.
And grief, which we're both working through in our own ways of our separate experiences and our own different journeys, but none of it's linear. And I guess that makes sense for this podcast because we have focused so much on trauma and grief as a whole, but for ourselves that, your brain is really effed up when you experience trauma and grief, and it makes it hard to sometimes think clearly, to be rational, to remember things. And then what did we say earlier? Everybody wants to be seen and witnessed, and we have so much to say that we are all over the place because you're like, oh yeah, I wanted to talk about that too. So we're just witnessing and seeing and validating each other's experiences while also taking you on this bumpy roller coaster ride.
This is what happens to your brain when these things like trauma, grief, whatever, that's how our brains are designed to be, right? We don't have control over that. It's just oh, you've experienced trauma and grief, this is what happens. And yet there's still this kind of idea that's well, I guess you have to get yourself together, right? Or kind of get over that grief brain or get over. But if that was supposed to be, then why is that the natural result of experiencing it. It's almost like, I don't know, we were designed to experience it that way, and society and community kind of pick up the slack as you're maybe not as okay. And this really is parallel to the stuff I always say about motherhood and having a community and a village. And motherhood is like, after you have a baby, it's not just like bounce right back, snap it back. And I don't just mean physically, I just mean mentally, emotionally. Your entire being has just changed, and your identity and your role has changed. And that is the hormones and all the things that we're made with. It's all supposed to happen. Yet society says, betray yourself, go against that, fix it, clean it up, clear it up. But I have no control over it. It's how I was literally made. It's how, especially in we know there's commonality in people who experience trauma. This, right? It's a diagnosis because it's a pattern, or grief.
Which I may have talked about this before, and if I don't remember, then hello, grief brain, trauma brain. But when I was going through, early days of my mom's death and dealing with that, I had a real problem in remembering things and staying focused and, watching. I couldn't read. Right. Like, I couldn't stay focused on anything to read, like an actual book. Watching TV, it had to be short term. It had to be comforting. It had to be something that I probably already saw because I didn't have to pay attention, because I couldn't. And I really thought something was wrong with me. Like, I really thought that, like, I wasn't doing grief right, or why am I this person? Like, and then I, read a book. And it's called It's Okay If You're Not Okay, by Megan Devine. It changed me a lot. It helped normalize my experience and to have my things validated, such as grief brain. There's a whole chapter on grief brain, and I was like, what? Right. So Jenn, a licensed therapist, my own therapist, telling me all of this is normal, which is fine. Right. But also, it's that having somebody who's experienced this tell you
and name it and claim it.
Naming it and claiming it. I was like, oh wait, this really does happen.
Right. And this is what it looks like. And oh my gosh, me too. Right. Again, here it is, that witnessing and connection of like, okay, me too. Like, I'm not weird, or it's not, but we don't talk about it. And just imagine a world where when we experience something like grief brain or whatever, and we didn't go, what's wrong with me? But rather, oh, I see, this is supposed to happen. And we all just responded in that way, as opposed to a society that's hyper-focused on productivity and getting back to normal, whatever that is. Like, no matter what your massive life event is, having a kid, having a loss, having whatever, it doesn't have to be massive, but massive events. And then the whole point is like, well, we got to get back to where you were. What if it was never supposed to be? What if this is life-changing, life-altering? You're not supposed to go back. What is the romanticism around getting back to what used to be? And why aren't we romanticizing evolution, growth, change? And this has forever changed me. Normalizing change. I see that all the time, like, normalize changing your mind, because we're so, I guess I feel archaic, and like, but you said when you were 5 years old that you wanted to be,
well, which also translates into sexual violence too, of consent. And
right. You changed your mind. Yes. Right. We can change our minds. Like, in anything, anything. You decided at 18, what you wanted to do with your life after you maybe graduated high school, whether you went to college or a trade school or whatever you ended up doing.
You're a child and your brain hasn't fully developed.
I'm not sure your brain ever really ever stops developing. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not a sciencey person, but
I mean, you can reshape, and you have things that
trauma impacts it, and then so does healing, right? So like, this idea that the brain was ever just like a permanent thing is wrong, right? Like,
well, I mean, I guess if it was, how would we learn new things?
Exactly, right? And how would we have life-changing things that literally change the direction of who we are as a person? You're a testament to that.
I think you are too.
Yeah, I do.
We've had that conversation of how this fire and this experience has changed things for you. I know that I've maybe not said it on the podcast, but to a lot of people who actually know me IRL, is that my baseline for importance of things in my life and how it affects me is my mom's death, which is the hardest thing that I have ever gone through. So how is insert whatever going to measure against that? Rarely there's probably not going to be anything that can measure up to that. And so how much energy and time do I want to put into being upset about that thing? Because as we all know, life is so precious and fleeting and things can change in the blink of an eye.
Right? You hear that things can change in a blink of an eye, and then you literally
you experience it, right? And I know you've told me that you understand now what it means, like, to measure everything by this baseline. Everybody has a baseline, whether they think about it, don't think about it, you know, of where we want to put our energy. And when you have something that has basically altered your life and turned your world upside down, I have learned that I don't care about things that I used to care about, and I'm not so wrapped up in what everybody else is doing, because I just want to live my own life, and I don't care what the person down the street is doing and who they're doing it with. Like, I don't care.
Right.
And so, it just changes everything, which I think I said in the first episode. On a cellular level, like, everything changes. And, you know, going back to my life before, you know, as you're saying that, I wouldn't want my life to go back to the way it was before, because I'm living life probably the way I've always wanted to, but never allowed myself to, because
indoctrination.
The indoctrination of what I was supposed to be doing, and all
success and what that is.
What success is, you know, how you measure that. And I think I'm at a place now in my grief, which has been an interesting thing for me to kind of observe and recognize, where I'm actually able to think about turning my pain into purpose. So I'm not saying there's a reason that my mom died. There's not a reason I had to take her off of artificial external life support. That's a term I've learned in my grief education.
Okay.
So that I'm not at a place yet to say there's a purpose for all of that, right? But what has happened to me, I want to, and I'm actively turning that into purpose, which is, you know, my soapbox of grief and how our culture works on that, and wanting to rewrite the narrative, and being very outspoken about saying no to all the things. No, you don't have to go back to work in 3 days. And no, you don't have to get over it. And yes, you're going to be sad forever, but it's this yes and. It's this duality of being able to carry all of that and understanding that it's okay. It's all of it is normal. There is no right or wrong way to experience grief. But
to have somebody be there and say those things without you knowing you need to hear it, you know, that's what you've done for me. Because I can speak, you know, firsthand about what you're doing and the evolution of where you are now with the grief education as more of a formal thing. I think you've always done it in a professional, but in like more formal at the cottage, and being a grief educator and doing prioritizing that. Is that I didn't know what I needed to hear. I didn't know I was scared of doing it wrong, doing grief wrong, you know. And again, licensed mental health professional, like, you think I do know for other people in some ways, but not for myself. And I was just this, like, I almost felt like a little bit of like a little kid who was like, I don't know what I do, you know, and I was lonely and scared, which I don't think has to be a sign to being a little kid, but we do feel that way as adults, and it feels a little bit nervous to say that, but that you were able to say things I didn't know I needed to hear, and felt such relief in that. And when someone can do that for you, when you don't know what you need or what is best for you in that moment, or what someone else can see, being seen, right? And offering what seems like something maybe minimal was huge for me. And I think you know that, but I think I just think it's important to say.
So can I ask you to maybe provide an example of what you're referring to for our listeners?
Well, I think very specifically, I'm an out loud processor. So I realize things as I either, write it out or speak it. I literally process as I do that.
I'm a run and hide.
You're
process.
You're a Marcus. And then sometimes you never come back and say, and I'm like, how'd it go? No, you do. I think, it's interesting. The internal processors forget to fill us back in. But that is how I do think. I remember where I was in, so we have a rental house now while our house is going to be demolished and rebuilt. So I'm very fortunate that this rental house has a sunroom, which is one of my favorite places. And I was sitting there sort of talking. I was like, I don't know. I just feel like it's lonely. I feel lonely and kind of isolating. And I realized that, and you're like, yep, that is exactly. And I can remember feeling, and you just then filled in blanks for me.
Was that when we had I think we had a long conversation about it. Yeah. And I remember telling you that I was on the verge of tears, hearing you say all of that, because finally, right, there's somebody who's actually soundboarding or reflecting back to me all of the things I have also felt. And although, like I said, people are supportive and they're there for you.
Yep.
It's a little different when you have somebody who is literally regurgitating your feelings without having to actually say what it is. It's like, oh my God, yes. Yes, now we can connect on this level too of feeling these ways. And, the loneliness also comes from not wanting to be a burden, right?
Yes.
So you're
not want to bring it back up, or even though this is, I know it's ridiculous to even say, but it's still in my mind, being all dramatic. Oh, we're talking about your fire again? Oh, here we go.
Well, right. That's what I was just going to say. It's been 2 months for you and Marcus and the family. And for me, it's been, almost 2 years. And so I feel as though I'm at a place in this journey where it would be very easy for people to not be understanding of why I might be sad or have tears pop up unexpectedly, or not want to plan events or outings or have plans in general regarding, around significant dates. Mother's Day was on Sunday. It's my second one without my mom. My first one was probably one of the literal shittiest times for a multitude of reasons that I won't go into, but this year was different. And I think that, Jenn has been helpful in this, is once I'm able to basically rewrite the narrative and make it what I want it to be. Again, it's all anxiety driven for a lot of the reasons, and the expectation, right? And being able to control. So when I am able to do things that I want to do in order to honor my mom, to honor myself, the day seems to be easier for me. And that's what I did this year for Mother's Day. And that's, her birthday is June 10th. Her death anniversary is September 25th. So I specifically try to not make plans on those days so that I can do what I want to do without the obligation or feeling like I have an obligation to show up in a capacity that I may not be able to.
And I think that is so significant, right? Because a lot of times we make plans, and this is just a general, a lot of times we make plans, let's say oh yeah, we're gonna get together for this thing in 2 months, and we're so excited about it. But then that rolls around and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't feel like going because of X, Y, and Z. Maybe I don't feel like it anymore. Maybe I had a rough week. And then it's like, yeah, but I said I'd go, and not really giving a lot of space just to honor that. And there's a lot of reasons why you still would go or whatever. But I think what you're doing is especially in a society that's like, no, plan it, get ready, do it, be productive, have it on the schedule, calendar, is like, I'm going to take it slow. I'm not going to rush. There's not a sense of urgency. I'm going to give myself space to see how I feel that day. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to create the narrative that day. So for some folks, it may be helpful to say, well, every birthday I go and do this thing, and that's really meaningful to me. Super great.
Some
works for you.
People want to be busy and not think about it, where, I mean, feelings are hard and sometimes they suck, and
especially because we're not given space to just, usually feel them. It's like, let me fix it. From when you're little, let me stop crying. How can I help?
Right.
Or like,
and I'm the kind of person that wants to dive headfirst into the waves to be able to work through it, because you can't get through something unless you go through it. Yeah. Right.
You can try, to avoid and go around and whatever, but ultimately it does
manifests
show
itself in other ways. But all of this to say that it would be very easy for folks to say, well, your mom died a year and a half ago. Right. So why are you still sad? Why are you still X? Your fire was 2 months ago. You all lived. Like, why are you still talking about this?
Yeah.
So, it can be isolating and lonely in that regard, because for myself personally, and I know I've said this to you before, is that I just feel like people are tired of hearing me talk about my mom or my sadness or, her death or any of the things. And maybe that's true for some folks. Maybe they are over it. Maybe they aren't. I don't know. But that's how I feel, because again, taking up space and having my feelings witnessed, and I kind of hold back on some of that with, people, or I save it for folks that I know that can relate to what I'm going through. I know I've mentioned Kim before on Instagram that I've met from her handle is Traveled and Balanced. She's also a grief educator. She teaches grief yoga. And both of her parents died in 2021, 3 months apart. But it's been nice to be able to message her and say, hey, I'm feeling XYZ today. Does that ever happen to you? Or vice versa. And it's nice to just have somebody who understands it to say, yeah, it does. Like, it's normal. Even though I know it's normal, it's nice to hear from somebody else, like, that's normal, or no, you're not being dramatic, or it's not selfish to want, people to remember these dates to reach out to you.
And I think that, again, kind of tapping back to, we are desperate for community, connection, and supporting one another, but we're so disconnected. But social media can be this way to connect. And even still in a society that really prioritizes like hyper independence and disconnection,
which is interesting because it's not like that in Europe.
So interesting.
America is its own little entity. Well, Ruby Kaur said that too when we saw her. Remember when she read her poem, something about productivity, and it didn't land with her European audiences. Like they couldn't understand this capitalistic view of productivity. Right. But back in North America, like, we all got it.
Well, yeah, we're like, oh yeah, because we understand the way in which we're expected to
because our worth is measured by our productivity.
Yeah. But even still, right? And when we're indoctrinated with this stuff, or we're disconnected, what I feel, deliberately, so that, we just kind of stay kind of separate in our little silos, even still the human spirit finds a way, what to connect. And social media, there's a lot of not so great things, but there's community created in that, right? Yeah. Support created in that, and that you can reach out to this woman who you haven't met in person but have a connection to, and you guys can support each other
through that. And it's been very helpful. And if I'm plugging other social media folks, I also, this year, one of my goals was to process my grief in a myriad of ways, not just talk therapy, which has been helpful to me, but I also, in addition to doing the grief educator program, which is also for myself to be able to heal and work through my grief and to help others, I signed up for a creative writing workshop, I guess, if you will, or series from the Mending Word on social media. And so it is a series of, I think it's 6 sessions where there is a small group of us. We're given a journal or a prompt, and we write about whatever this prompt is. And then if we would like to share amongst the group, we can. This is all done virtually. Those who know me know that this is straight outside of my comfort zone.
Right.
In all of the ways.
And also, Crystal has things that are always outside of her comfort zone, yet she dives head first, like she said, into doing it. So while it's out of her comfort zone, she continues to put herself in uncomfortable situations for evolution and growth, and it usually ends up being powerful.
Yeah, very powerful. And I have found this to also be very powerful. And, you know, the journal prompts or the writing prompts that have been, you know, brought up have been things that I wouldn't have normally like thought about or tapped into. So it's just another way for me to tap into not just my grief, but my relationship with grief, my relationship with my mom.
Yep.
I did a bonus Mother's Day session, which was the week before Mother's Day with, you know, there were people in this little session that weren't in my normal cohort, and it was very, very emotional. And I cried pretty much the whole hour hearing other people's stories and, you know, kind of just reliving my own experiences. And, you know, I was fortunate enough that my partner was at my house for this, you know, in a different space, but I was able to go to her afterwards and receive comfort and, you know, validation and just support. Not fixing anything, just hearing and witnessing my experience, which means the world to me.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've even gotten to tell her that, but that meant so much
to me. You did now.
But, you know, that meant so much to me to be able to have that.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm usually a person that likes to run and hide and deal with things on my own. That's my natural inclination, is to flee.
Well, I think it's like a learned inclination, right? Like from what we experience. Right.
Well, don't be a burden. Mm-hmm. Your feelings are too big.
Or even when we're, you know, when we're younger and like just the way of being, right? Of kids, like, I mean, that's the generation we're from.
Well, right. And I grew up in the 80s, and look, for all the other people that made it out of the 80s alive.
We were just talking about it. We both almost got kidnapped when we were kids. Hello? Like, what?
Yeah. High five to making it out alive. But, you know, it meant a lot to me to have that support and to be validated. And it was big for me to allow myself
I was just going to say that.
Be vulnerable, to have crying and
just just to receive it. Right. And like, because I think that through my experience of your grief around your mom, you had talked before about like, I don't want to be grieving and know I'm making that other person who's supporting me uncomfortable so that I have to like clean myself up and be like ungrievy. So I don't want to worry about that. And so therefore I don't want to be around anybody when I'm grieving. Or I'm having a moment, or it's a particularly important day, you know, like Mother's Day or Mom's birthday or death anniversary. But what really kind of evolved, or that I've seen evolve, you allow yourself to evolve through, is that yes, there's a time and a space and a necessity for being alone and having that, you know, peace to it if it's desired, and being around folks who you do feel safe and supported by, and letting yourself receive that too, and the connection around it.
Well, yeah. I mean, even though we may already know this, and I already knew this, but it was a nice reinforcement that in my grief educator training, that's done by David Kessler, who is the world's foremost expert on grief.
Yeah, he's a griefy guy.
Said, you know, we can't heal in isolation.
Which is like mind-blowing and just so true and so simple yet so profound.
Right. And so that really speaks to what you just said, especially for my own journey of, you know, wanting to be alone initially for that doesn't mean I was like by myself, holed up in my house or anything. I had support. I had wonderful friends that have been like the literal best. But it's hard for me to sometimes express my feelings in front of folks because of the reason of not wanting to make people feel uncomfortable. So their discomfort in my like sadness or wanting to fix it or, I don't want to ask about your mom because, I'm sorry that you cried. No.
Right.
It's always still going to be the same response. You did not make me cry by asking about my mom.
Right.
I want you to do that. I'm crying because my mom is dead.
Yeah.
So
that's a normal response.
Whether you asked about it or not, I'm probably still gonna cry.
Well, and I'm sorry I made you cry. You didn't make me cry. But also, like, it's okay. Crying is not.
It's not a bad thing.
Bad thing.
It's also actually a really great way for us to get out toxins.
It's very cleansing.
Yeah.
On so many levels.
There's a lot of symbolism in the tears and being salt and.
Right. It's almost like we were designed to cry as a cathartic response to emotionality.
Yeah. Well,
yet we fight what we're literally designed and wired for.
Yeah. And, here's a homework assignment or maybe just a thing for folks to kind of tune into, but maybe remember a time where you had a really good cry. Or if you have a really good cry, that doesn't mean it's because it's a happy experience, just a deep emotional release and kind of tune in with how do you feel after that?
Right. How do you feel after that? And I think if we let ourselves it's usually
you feel better. Yeah, it really is. And that was in an Apple TV show called Shrinking. And, I started watching that. I paid for my subscription to Apple TV again because of that show and their representation of grief. And that's not saying that they got 100% of everything right. I get that. But for me, it validated on a bigger level, like experiences that I had. And one of the things that I think it's Harrison Ford's character tells Jason Segel's daughter, his wife / her mother died, is that cry for 15 minutes a day. And she, I think, listened to a song and cried for 15 minutes. And she felt a lot better because it was a way for her to get her grief out of her system.
There's so many ways that we're wired for relief and catharsis and letting go and, relieving ourselves. So like, again, I say, what if we didn't fight things that were naturally occurring in our body and wondering what's wrong with me, but instead being like, oh, it's happening because it's supposed to, and just because it doesn't fit my workday, doesn't mean it's not still a human experience and very validating.
Yeah, well, right. It's that disconnection. Yes, we're always connected to our bodies and our minds. They're part of us. But I think that, again, this isn't scientific. It's just my own experience. There's often a disconnect between our body and our mind for multitude of reasons. But also, like I said, the world is a dumpster fire and you don't always have the opportunity to tune into how is your body feeling? What's my brain saying? So, yeah. And
our producer just told us we need to wrap it up because we're going for a little while.
And I'm sure all the listeners are probably thinking the same thing. Like,
yes. Right, which we respect
for
that.
12 hours, which
which maybe you did.
Maybe you did, but I guess also I guess we'll just say it from right now on. These will probably be, 12-hour podcasts.
Right. And you can pause it and come on back.
You can pause. You can also speed it up, which I do for podcasts that are too long. I put it on like double time.
Right. Yep.
So then we sound like we're chipmunks.
But you can giggle with us. But as we are wrapping up, I do want to make sure that, we do say that, on June 16th, 6:30 to 8:30, is that right? Or 6 to 8?
6:30 to 8:30.
6:30 to 8:30. Crystal will be hosting her first grief healing circle at the cottage. It is a 2-hour event. And I will actually be a participant there because it's, as I said, Crystal has been immensely helpful. And I'm grateful that she's my friend, but also that I get to take advantage of, that's not what I mean. I get to participate in her offerings. So it's a Friday, June 16th, 6:30 to 8:30 at the Healing Cottage, which is 4 Crawford Street in Middletown. You can go to the website to register. We make it very, very simple. It's balancedmindjourney.com, balanced with an ED, mindjourney.com/services. And you can find all of the services we offer there, but Crystal's Grief Circle is there as well. And I know that I don't think there's actually that many spaces left. Right? It's like,
there's 10.
There's 10. That's
we have 10 spaces available, and 3 are already taken.
Yeah. So there is, we have some time before then. But it is. We know that there's a need for it. So if you're thinking about it, again, doesn't matter what grief, it doesn't matter how long it's been, it doesn't matter if it's a person or a thing that you're grieving or any type of loss, this is for you. This is space.
And just to clarify, this is a peer-led, peer support. So this isn't a replacement for mental health therapy.
Right.
I'm not a licensed therapist. This is more on a peer level because, like I've said, in my own experiences, this is something that I can also relate to. So I want
and she's a certified grief educator a la David Kessler. So while she may not be a licensed therapist, she is certified in this type of healing, process. Right. So yes, there's a lot of personal experience that definitely informs it, which is super important. And she is certified. She is legit.
Okay.
She already has been legit. I mean, really.
So, if you want more information about that, you can go to the website. You can send me an email, Crystal, CRYSTAL at balancedmindjourney.com. Yeah. You can find us on social media at Healing Cottage, Delaware, at Yoga with Crystal 0925, at Meet Me at the Cottage podcast.
Yep.
If you have questions, please reach out. We are also started doing a monthly newsletter. It's pretty short.
It's actually good.
We're not going to blow your inbox up, but if you would like to be added to our monthly newsletter, you can send me an email or you can go to our website and subscribe, and you'll be added to the June newsletter that will be coming out in a few weeks. So yeah, thanks for being here with us, folks, and welcoming us back and being patient while we worked through our lives changing and the things that have come up.
And shout out to Marcus always for being the guy behind the scenes, but also my partner and a person who experienced a tragedy clearly with me, and his own healing that he's doing and we're doing together, and the ways that we support our children. I just feel really grateful, to him. And we are trauma bonded for life. So,
and just a special shout out to Marcus on my own, because we happen to be like little twinsies.
Yeah.
In our introversion and
yes, and internal processing.
Being an internal processor.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, and we're grateful for anyone who is listening, and we appreciate it, and we love doing it genuinely. It's really a joy for us to do. So thanks for just being a part of it with us.
And also, we want to hear from you. So is there something that you would like us to talk about? I know we have no structure, but we can come up with a structure or add it to our list of things to talk about.
We'll just add it to things to talk about.
Or maybe you have feedback. We
love
feedback.
With criticism, we want to hear it all. We're probably not going to change anything, but no, I'm just kidding.
Well, I mean, right? It comes to the whole outside of our comfort zone and growing from that, and we're able to hear.
Yes, we are.
All of the things.
Take it in, modify.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I guess that's it for us. We're just gonna date stamp this. It's May 20th, 2023.
Yeah.
Not sure when the episode will come out.
Marcus does turn it around quickly.
He does.
He also is a traumatized individual. So we will see what happens.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. But look forward to being with you all.
See you out there.
Thanks.
Bye. wish that we could have had the organic conversation again about our running and dying and being old. But
next time.
What conversation did you have about running, dying?
You didn't hear that?
No, I must have missed it.
Oh, we were talking about how, we were back to the couch to 5K thing, and we were saying that,
well, when I stopped running, it was before I went to Italy. So
right, and I did that with you.
In February.
I stopped running because I was just like, I don't know, I hit a wall. But we were doing well on our couch to 5K.
Yeah, and then, you had a fire, so
well,
then there's that.
Well, sure, right. Then I was like, I don't know, grief eating, whatever. And it's not to shame any kind of food by any means. It's just there was comfort food, right? And then eating out.
Dopamine?
I'm sure.
Yeah.
This is not my wheelhouse. I mean,
right.
I probably should know more, but I sure don't. But like I was eating just like, we're eating out a lot because we lived in a hotel for 3 months.
3 weeks.
That's what I meant. It did feel like 3 months. While we were, and so there was a small stove, but we weren't even remotely interested in cooking. So, and we got a lot of folks gave us a lot of gift cards, which was again another tremendous support. So, point being is it was Chick-fil-A all day, and like just food, sugar, all the things that were just like survival and comfort. And so that's what I've been doing for the last couple of months. And then I was like, obviously this is not good for my body. Actually, another thing that you said was helpful was I was like, I saw myself in the mirror and looked really swollen, and you're like, oh yeah, that's inflammation related to trauma. And I was like, oh, right, like I looked in the mirror, I was like, you are swollen, girl. And surely what I was eating, like lots of
sugar and salt,
yeah, all that stuff. And then we were like, we're getting back into the running, the couch to 5K.
And since we haven't run for 3 months, why don't we just start where we left off?
Right, and ate like just unhealthy, not nutritious to your body in any way. That was me, right? And anyway, it was more like our body was like, oh, we're giving up. Is that what we're doing? We're just gonna go ahead and just give up. Yep, that's what we're doing. So we were like, well, we'll just roll it back a week. We'll start at week 5, as if we didn't just spend the last couple months being like, who cares? And our bodies were like, what are we doing
against us?
Yeah. What? I don't know what you're doing, girl, but you just told us we were giving up. Yeah. So why are we running now?
It felt harder than when we first started in January.
Yeah, and we let up. We did well, like leading up to that, and just being like, yeah.
Hi, in case you don't remember, I'm 44.
Right, I'll be 44 in November, and being like, and also right, like we were sedentary, or is that the word sedentary? Mm-hmm. Sedentary. I don't know. And didn't we just like almost die? Why are we running? Are we running again from something? What's happening? And then, but I will say it's been helpful to release. I think that's something else you said to me, like releasing that pent up.
Right. Another great book about that is called Burnout.
Yep.
Releasing the Stress Cycle, or Completing the Stress Cycle, by Emily and Amelia Nagoski.
Yeah, Nagoski. Yeah.
But
that's a good one. Yeah, completing the stress cycle. That was helpful. Like again, I know these things, but when it comes to applying it myself, that's where you've been very helpful in saying like, yeah, that makes sense. And I'm like, oh yeah, that does make sense.
We got to get these stress hormones out of our body. So you have to, if they don't, they get stuck, right? They have to go through the tunnel. So however you move your body, whether that's jumping around in your house for 5 minutes, running, dancing, doing some kind of movement, just to release everything out of your body so it doesn't get stuck.
And I do feel less inflamed and less swollen. I mean, I really do. And I always run with Rosie because I have consumed a lot of true crime, and I'm like, you're not going to get me with my dog. They probably would, but I'm like, nuh-uh. But she tries to kill me every time we run. So like I almost fall over her. She stops like abruptly, and I almost fall again. I was like, one day someone's just going to find me, or I'm just going to return with like skin knees and skin hands. Like,
oh yeah, that's what I said. Like little kids. I'm going to tack out on the elementary school track,
and some kid's going to find you.
Some kid's going to find me, and I'm going to traumatize a whole school. So, yay.
All by just in the name of health.
Right, exactly.
Okay, we're done. We're done?
Yeah.